Okay, thank you. Thank you all for coming back in. It's a pleasure to open up the second session of this morning. I'm really delighted that we have with us today George Freeman, who I think you know is Minister for Science, Research and Innovation. I don't think you need a lot of introduction. And of course, you do have George's CV in your booklet anyway. George was elected in 2010 and has been Science Minister now for a relatively short period of time, but a really important juncture in what's happening to UK science. So it's a really great pleasure to invite you to address this morning, George. Thank you.
Mark, thank you. Those of you who know me well know that I carry this around, but I never read what it says. Can I just firstly thank you? I think I've lost track of how many Links days we've had. This is my 12th since being elected to Parliament. I've tried to make them all. I've dreamt of being here as your minister. It's a really important day when Parliament comes together. We've got colleagues here from all parties and none. None is still the biggest party in British politics, I think it's fair to say. But most importantly, we've got colleagues from the House of Lords, from the House of Commons. This is a day where science comes to Parliament and Parliament listens to science. And it's a huge privilege and a pleasure to be here as Minister for Science. And boy, do we need that conversation. But I just wanted to start by thanking you and the Royal Society and all the team who put this together. It's a really important day, and there are a whole series of meetings as well as these formal meetings going on all across the House. And it's a particular pleasure to be here on the day when we've announced a major expansion of the research support for Ukrainian researchers. And I think everyone here, we meet at a time when the world is facing some very big challenges: the urgency of climate change, the urgency of feeding 9 billion mouths, the urgency of preventing those really deep global development challenges that are driving the insecurity, that's driving the immigration, that's driving the geopolitical tensions. In the end, the solutions to these challenges will come from science. They'll come from technology and innovation, not just the deep science of the bioscience, although they're going to be important, but also the humanities, the social science of how we design clean cities, how we embrace and learn the lessons of the pandemic, and how we make this next 2 or 3 decades a period where we really deliver that model of sustainable growth globally. This isn't just a nice phrase. This is now urgent geopolitics line 1. We have got to find a way to get the world through this very challenging period. And to be Minister for Science, Research and Innovation at a time when we've seen a savage and brutal invasion of a European nation, not 2.5 hours flight from here, people like us, people with the same aspirations, people who were liberated recently from the tyranny of communism, facing this appalling destruction. I'm really pleased, but more importantly, proud. I think we can all be proud of the response of the UK research community. We've done our bit in government. I'm delighted we're announcing today a 10-fold increase. We're setting out now £10 million, sorry, a 4-fold increase, £10 million for the support for Ukrainian researchers scheme. That's 120 fully funded 2-year fellowships. It's 120 families. And we're now seeing fast-track visa scheme and people coming here. It's a really important signal, I think, from the UK research community that we believe science is a force for good. We believe research is a force for good at the big meta level, but also at the human level. And I think this whole community can be very proud. And I wanted to thank the Nuffield, Oxford University, the 74 universities that have opened their doors, both for refugees, but also for researchers. This is Britain putting our best foot forward and signalling that we're here for people in their time of crisis. And it's not us poaching the best Ukrainian researchers. We want them to be here so their careers aren't interrupted, and then go back and help drive the reconstruction of Ukraine. And I'm doing a lot of work with the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State at DCMS on how we might support, particularly the digital technologies, to drive the reconstruction of that country. But look, on a happier note, let me say what a privilege it is to be here as the UK Minister for Science and Research at such an important time. And I want to just really share with you 3 big messages. The first is the importance of science as a force for good in the world. The second is the importance of science, technology, research and innovation in the UK for giving opportunity and prosperity and hope to people left behind by a broken model of growth in the last 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years. And then thirdly, share with you some thoughts on what we've really got to do to deliver the big win that I think inspires and excites us all. So firstly, let me just unpack the science of force for good. I think I coined the term science superpower in urging various prime ministers over the last 15 years to take science, technology, and innovation more seriously. Well, beware, budding politicians, the phrases you come up with, because you might have to end up delivering them. And I've been very as clear as I can in the last few months, because it's not a phrase actually that a lot of my research and academic friends much warm to, because it has notions of sort of geopoliticizing and militarizing science. Let me be clear what I mean, and I've said it in numerous speeches, by science superpower. First, the broad theme is Britain using our science and research excellence for global good. Specifically, one, world-class science. It's a phrase we use easily. We are home to some amazing world-class science, but world-class science is an easy phrase. It's very hard to do, and we have got to keep making sure we are the home to more world-class science than anyone else, pound for pound, and that is not easily done. And there's a whole bunch of things we have to do to make sure we continue to attract and retain the best, cut out the bureaucracy, and make the UK a constantly evolving powerhouse for world-class research. Two, attracting global talent here. That's not just to nurture our community, and not just to give hope and opportunity to people all around the world. But if we're really going to believe in and nurture science as a force for good, scientia around the world, and we're going to have to be quite tough with some of our geopolitical and hostile opponents on sharing some bits of data, we're going to have to be more open where we can. And that means creating the doors so that young Russian and Chinese scientists can come here and discover why we're so passionate about free speech, freedom, critical thinking, peer review, and the transparency that is at the heart of good science. Three, science for global good. I believe very passionately that we are home to a lot of the technologies, particularly, might I say, in the biosciences, in food, medicine, energy, for tackling the big global challenges, the drought-resistant crops, the disease-resistant crops, the algae for CO2 captures, a whole raft of technologies we're sitting on. But I think we've been doing too much science in too deep a silo for 30, 40 years, and we've lost the knack of globalizing it for global good. And that's partly the inevitable result, in fact, of our membership of the EU. I was a loud Remainer. But the truth is that being in the EU club, it did accelerate the sort of servicification of the UK economy. We became the sort of Wall Street, Manhattan, London financial services economy in the European network of nations. Germany became more of a manufacturer. It's driven the differentiation of difference of economies. And I think we've lost something. We've lost that 1940s, 50s, 60s, the Concorde, the Harold Wilson white heater technology, the Frank Whittle jet engine, that thing that we've always done really well, which is to take our science technology and use it for global good. Four, attracting global R&D. There is a wall of money internationally for the new technologies of tomorrow, for the new companies, for the new economic opportunities, and we need to be attracting it here. And by opening up our science and research base, we can liberate our research base from the tyranny of being totally dependent on government the whole time, which isn't a very sustainable model long term, I would suggest. We need core government funding, but you also need to have a more mixed model of funding, much more philanthropy, much more industry, much more innovation alongside that absolutely core government funding. And lastly, harnessing all of that for geopolitical influence. Some of you will have heard me say, I was recently on the aircraft carrier, the HMS Prince of Wales. By the way, it's a foot longer than Queen Elizabeth II, which is a nice touch by the engineers. I mean, talk about tribute to British engineering. I was there at a trade event, and I said in front of the now Chief of the Defence Staff, I would suggest personally that we've done more for global security through Ebola, through COVID, through Zika, than we probably did in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, that's quite a controversial thing to say. We did a lot of good in Iraq and Afghanistan, but the point was he nodded, and everyone in the room said, I mean, they all understand, Britain as a science force for good is a major superpower, and that's what I mean by superpower, moving to being more of a force for hope to those global challenges. So it's in that context that I've just come back from the G7, where we are, by the way, hugely respected as a science force for good. And back from the EU and from Brussels, I'm sure there'll be a question about Horizon, signaling very clearly that if we're not able to join the European research programs, which have had 90% of our international research funding in the last few decades, 10% for the rest of the world, we'll simply have to do more internationally. And I can tell you there is a wall of appetite to work with us on polar research, on agri-tech in Africa, on clean tech, all around the world. Nations are saying, we love to work with you. And I'm hoping that we can stay in Horizon, but if we're not, the work I'm doing with the Treasury is to ring fence all that money and commit to a more global program of UK science and research for good. And I just on that, I would just make one point. I think we haven't made clear enough in government the scale of the commitment that we're making to this. This isn't just a sort of one energized minister. Through the integrated review post-Brexit, if you haven't read it, please do. It's a really important document. We set out the ambition to be a much more strategic global science, technology and innovation superpower. And we've set up at the heart of government the National Science and Technology Council alongside the National Security Council. They are the two most senior advisory panels in the land. And when it meets, I'm a fixed member of it, chaired by the PM on his side of the table, the heads of the intelligence agencies, the National Security Advisor, the top brass geopolitically, and on our side of the table, the top half of the cabinet. And it's there to be able to give Whitehall permission and support to take some quite big strategic decisions about science and technology. Again, we haven't done this for 30, 40, 50 years, but we are leaning in order to be able to make those big decisions. Second point, you've heard me say, many of you, that we won't be a science superpower unless we're also an innovation nation. And I want to just make the point that science is not the same as technology, which is not the same as innovation. They're related, but they're very different things, as you all know, but many across Whitehall often confuse the terms. And it's my deep belief that in order to be a science superpower, you have to be an innovation nation. You have to not just nurture, do the research, you have to adopt it, you have to use it, you have to test it, you have to prove it, you have to procure it, you have to regulate for it. And it's in that piece that I think actually our biggest challenge as a country is. We've generally been brilliant at science, brilliant at occasional bits of innovation, but we haven't really been an innovation economy. And that's about using the catapult network for much deeper industrial engagement, supporting not just little companies that are struggling, but little companies to grow and scale, supporting scale-up finance in the city, connecting the city to our science and technology base, using our regulatory freedoms, not to race to the bottom, but as I set out in the PM's task force on innovation and regulation, to race to the top, to be the nation that sets the standards for satellite retrieval, as I announced last week, for agri-tech, for autonomous vehicles, for AI and healthcare. Set the global standards, put the Union Jack around them, people around the world respect our values, and then we make the UK a test bed. So that piece is really important, but crucially, it's got to go beyond London and the Golden Triangle. And I think the biggest reform I'm trying to put in place is to focus Bays not on the little announcements we make. There are hundreds through the year. In the end, we'll grow an innovation economy, not by moving the Golden Triangle north, but by nurturing the clusters all around the country. We've mapped them. We're doing a lot of work to look at them. You can make a case there are 40. We've settled on 30. By clusters, I mean the Norwich Agri-Tech Cluster, the John Innes, the Norwich Research Park. I mean the South Coast Marine Science and Technology Cluster. I mean the Cornish Coding and Space Cluster. I mean the South Wales Semiconductor Cluster. These are internationally recognized. And my main focus is to make sure that we properly understand what's holding them back. And we'll grow an innovation economy by letting those clusters grow and thrive. And I'm suggesting within Bays, we should be just quite straightforward about it and define them as places, never square, never round, never triangular, never fitting in a constituency or a county. Places in which people take risks in pursuit of opportunities. And if we can think of them as an ecosystem like that, back and empower local leaders, they're the acorns of tomorrow's innovation economy. And it's really important because if we don't give people in Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, windy backwaters of Norfolk, the Southwest, a chance to engage in this incredibly exciting science, technology and innovation economy, we won't win the public support for more funding for it. And we won't do what we all want to do, which is improve people's lives and create hope and opportunity and apply the nobility of science for a new and more sustainable economy. So finally, what do I think are the keys to success? It's a big vision. I totally accept that. But when I go around the world, people don't look skeptical. They say, of course. I mean, that's what Britain should be doing. We're going from, anyone here know, I think this audience does know, what percentage of our GDP do we as a country invest and spend on research? Anyone know? Anyone know what the OECD average is? 2.4%, yeah. So all of us here who are passionate about science have all said, we've got to get to 2.4%. That's the average. I would suggest if you want to be a superpower, we've got to be through average pretty fast and get up into the upper echelons. So if I tell you that Israel, the great startup nation, I went recently, they're at 4.4, Switzerland, where I went recently to sign an MOU, they're at 3.8. Germany going from 3.4 to 3.6. We've been at 1.7. We're a service economy doing world-class science, but in quite deep silos. So we've made a big commitment to get to 2.4 fast. We're putting in an extra 30 billion over the next 5 years. To get to 2.4, we've got to turn that 30 billion extra into 100 billion across the whole economy. It's a big number, but that's across life sciences, space, quantum, fusion, compound semiconductors, the 30 clusters. And we're now in the process of working out in government how we might do it. The money's there. My fear is that unless we change the way we work in government, if we just think of handing out grants from Whitehall, we're not going to unlock that investment. It's there. And I want to see that the 30 billion comes in and the other money comes in so that UK science and research is never again underfunded and it's sustainable. It has a mixed funding source. So China's at 240 billion a year. America's at 180 ex defense, call it 300 with defense. We're going to 22. Amazing. It better be the best 22 billion in the world, right? It better be the 22 billion that brings the best people here, that drives the best research community, that drives the most groundbreaking research, wins more prizes, publishes more top papers, and drives change. And I think there are 3 keys to that. One is people. It's always about people. In the end, people do deals with people, people collaborate with people do science and research with other people. If we're really going to be a powerhouse, we have got to retain the best people, many going into much better paid jobs in industry. We have to confront that. We have to attract the best people, and putting people at the heart of the ecosystem is a complete passion of mine. And I think if we get it right, and we get all the history suggests, if you get the best bright young scientists here, they'll fall in love with something, somewhere, or someone. The same is true the other way around. I recently met a brilliant Oxford graduate who's just won the great flagship fellowship at the Max Planck Institute. 10 years funding for her postdoc, her researcher, and choice across the whole of the Max Planck Institute. 80 institutes, she can go where she wants. She's 29. She's completely brilliant. And with a tear in her eye, she said, there is nothing like this, Minister, in the UK. And I intend to reverse that. Unless we can make the UK the most exciting ecosystem for talent to navigate, they'll leave. She's in Germany, and guess what? She's engaged. And the next thing, she'll have a family, and she'll be in Germany for 20 years. Fantastic. And then she wants to come back. But we have got to get better at understanding people have choices, and they'll go where they can. And we have got to work harder, not take people for granted. 2, freedom from bureaucracy. We've created, I want to suggest, a very bureaucratic, quite slow, clunky, frustrating research funding ecosystem. The great scientists I know say to me, I'm here despite, Minister, the system that we've put in place, actually, from the Treasury to BAYS to UKRI to the research councils to the labs to the professors to the researchers. We have got to make this a more fast-footed, agile, multidisciplinary, digital, creative, people-backing ecosystem. And that's why the Nurse Review, the Grant Review, and the Tickell Review are such important reviews. They've all landed on my desk at the same time. And it's really important that we improve our system. And lastly, the local clusters. I think if we really lean in and support these centres of excellence, we made a big commitment to move to 55% of R&D beyond the Greater South East. And Michael Gove and I are working very closely together on it. We've launched 3 big innovation accelerators in Glasgow, Manchester, and the West Midlands. I'd love another 27, so would he. If we can really drive that regional network of clusters, then I think we'll nurture the talent, drive the growth and innovation, and attract a new generation of people. The most important thing is that we speak with one voice. I happen to agree with Adrian Smith and others that we need to make sure that whoever's in government, science has a minister right at the top of government, at the heart of government. I'm doing my best as a junior minister to give this incredible sector all the leadership it needs. I think the public are with us. I think they saw in the pandemic the power of science. Never in my life did I dream that people at Wimbledon would rise to their feet and give a hitherto unknown biologist a round, a standing ovation, you know, with tears in their eyes. You saw people queuing for the jab at the sort of Olympiad of science. People in this country have really got it. And I want to work with Chi and everyone here to make sure we harness that and we don't drop back and that we don't slip back. I think if we do it, we'll make this a period, we'll look back in years to come and say, we did it. And we are now genuinely viewed internationally as a powerhouse, a superpower of science for global good. Thank you, Mark. Thank you all.
Okay, Thank you very much, Minister. We are on quite a tight schedule. I know that you're on a very tight schedule as well, but you've kindly agreed to answer a couple of quick questions. So I'm going to propose we do maximum 3, and you perhaps can answer them all at once. Can I encourage people not to give speeches, to ask fairly straightforward, quick questions? That would be really helpful in moving us along. And I think we can assume, Minister, that Horizon and Plan B is on everyone's mind. And anything you can say about that, or the way in which this community could influence and feed into how that's developed, if it happens, would be really useful to hear. So can I have the first question? Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Fantastic speech. I'm Doug Brown, Chief Exec of the British Society for Immunology. And we heard earlier this morning from Chion Wura and Stephen Metcalfe that the voice of science in Parliament is absolutely crucial. So my question is twofold. Do you think that voice is loud enough in Parliament at the moment? But also, what can we, as these big societies with thousands of members, do to increase the volume of that voice and help deliver your vision?
Thank you much. Is there another question we can wrap into that on a later? Yes, please.
Carolyn Reynolds, I'm with the Royal Society of Biology in Australasia, and I've come specially for this meeting, and would like to suggest that by supporting your associations overseas, just as the Chinese are doing in the north of Northern Territory, you, by funding British scientists or associations overseas, you have a voice in that country. And at the moment, there are some very strategic scientific developments. For example, we launched a NASA satellite only on Sunday evening from the Northern Territory. And we are very worried about what is happening with the support from China.
Thank you very much. And just one final quick question. Yes.
Stephen Baden. George, should Britain have a cabinet minister for science? What more could you do if you were that person in that cabinet?
Trouble, Stephen. Well, 3 great questions, and I'll do Horizon as part of it. So let me start internationally and then come back in to the UK. So to Kerry, your point is really well made. And at the G7 recently, with the EU in Brussels, at the Eureka programme through the European Space Agency, I've clocked up more air miles in the last few months than I really wanted to. But because I want people to understand that we are not at all retreating, we're not turning our backs, we're not using Brexit as a moment to try and do science behind walls, quite the opposite. The Prime Minister, one of the absolute pillars of my support for him has been and remains that he gets this. He's passionate about science and research. And so the membership of those European programs was always absolutely fundamental. You remember nothing was agreed until everything was agreed. Well, everything was agreed, very painfully, you will all remember, including our membership, our association of Horizon, Copernicus and Euratom. The Swiss haven't agreed it. They're in a very different position. Ours was agreed, it's been signed. And whilst I absolutely understand the frustration that the EU feel about the Northern Ireland situation, it was always going to be difficult. We always knew Northern Ireland, where it's the only place where the UK has a land border with the single market, was going to be difficult, which is why we negotiated the Northern Ireland Protocol. There are remedies for all the disputes in it. The principles are all very clear. It has nothing to do with science. And whilst I understand the integrity of the EU single market, that's why I campaigned for us to be in EFTA, the truth is that for 18 months we've waited, and our membership of Horizon has been weaponized as part of those negotiations. It won't work for several reasons. One, I have no jurisdiction over Northern Ireland politics. So there is absolutely no basis on which the pain I'm experiencing I can translate into Northern Ireland. 2, legally, they are completely unrelated, and there's a very strong legal basis, not that I suggest that's necessarily worth pursuing, to make the case that it is illegal, actually, because the remedies of the Northern Ireland situation are in the Northern Ireland Protocol. More pragmatically, my message to European researchers, and by the way, we have huge support across member states, across the Commission even, in the DG Research and Finance, I think 14 Nobel Prize winning European scientists have said, stick to science. We should have the UK in Horizon. It's also, they know that our 15 billion and more importantly, our intellectual leadership are key. So very strong support for us. So why are we being blocked out? And it's the top of the commission. I understand why. It's a very small group who are saying this is a principle for the EU. Everyone must stand together. I think it's a huge shame. And I likened it to a situation post-divorce. The first thing you should do in any divorce is agree and put the children first, agree the access arrangements. And there are bound to be disputes later about money, but you don't weaponize the children in a dispute about money. And I just think this is very sad, and it will damage European science, and it is already beginning to damaging ours, which is why I've made very clear, we've waited 18 months. When I first started in this role, more or less everyone in the community said, it's Horizon or nothing, Minister, don't get distracted by Plan B. Well, the opinion moved pretty quickly to, I hope you've got a Plan B, and it better be good, it better be very, very compelling. And we're now at a situation where a lot of ERC fellowship professors are saying, the EU are on the phone telling me if I don't move this autumn, I won't get funding. I think that's a bit outrageous, if I'm honest. We need to put people first, but I have to respond. So we will be, I've made very clear, if the phone doesn't ring in the next few weeks, sort of by the summer holidays, my working assumption is we're out and we will launch Plan B in the summer. And the first piece will be around fellowships. And we set out a very bold plan for big international prestigious fellowships, so that those ERC holders have a choice. I mean, literally, they're sitting down with their partners saying, darling, we're going to have to move the children out of school and move back. It's horrendous. So I want to give them a really big flagship fellowship funding commitment so they don't have to make that decision. And then we'll be rolling out more plans around much broader package of global fellowships, strong industry and innovation support, and then big global partnerships. To your point, at the various international meetings I've been at, I've signaled that this commitment to global challenges is fundamental. So for example, polar research. We're a powerhouse in polar research through the British Antarctic Survey. The natural polar research nations, good nations for non-militarization of polar research, are Chile, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Norway, Finland, and us. So what about a global polar research collaboration with fellowships? Work with the Inuits, work with the British Antarctic Survey, go to the Chile research station at Tierra del Fuego. Global collaboration, cross-funding. I'm absolutely clear there are lots of these. Agri-tech for Africa, bioscience for drought-resistant crops. There is a wall of interest around the world, and I want to do this in a way that's open to European researchers, but wouldn't it be better if we could all do it together? And you make a really important point about China. We cannot stand back and just let China move into Africa, move in to the Antarctic, to the North Pole, and exploit these areas for their own personal gain. We need to be very strong in signaling commitment to international science. In terms of voice of science in Parliament, the reason I try and approach this in a very non-partisan way is that we need that voice to be very strong. And Chi and I will have indeed do have points of difference, but we agree in the spirit of Joe Cox on much more than we disagree on. And it's really important that, and in all my roles, I've tried for the science community to take the politics out. You need a bit of robust debate. I mean, you need to be at the dispatch box under pressure. That's good. But the most important thing is that we speak with one voice. And to your question, what can you do? I think you're doing it here at the Links Day. I think it's not as simple as sort of quoted, we need 10% of MPs should be scientists. I'm not really a scientist, if I'm honest, but you need people who get it and who are passionate about it. And I think one thing would be, when the local Labour Party or Liberal Democrat or Green or Conservative Party are selecting candidates, turn up and ask some questions. And just most people in mainstream politics think science is a bit of a sideshow. And that's because we're not engaged enough. And in the grubby business of contested politics, we do have to engage. And I think there's a very strong voice the science community can speak with. It was science that is actually on the side of the people. It was science that drove the Enlightenment, science that smashed the tyranny of the unaccountable elites in medieval Europe, science that liberated people from the tyranny of superstition and disease, science as a force for good. If that doesn't inspire a new generation, I don't know what does. And I think we've sometimes, the science community has been trapped into silos of silence, begging for money in return for sort of silent compliance. I think those days are over. I think the science community needs to speak more loudly for the values that underpin all of our work. And lastly, Stephen, I'm going to get into trouble if I say any more, but I would just say this. I think the Prime Minister and the Cabinet have made very public commitments about the importance of this agenda. To go to 2.4%, a big commitment. And a number of people are observing that if you really want something to be a commitment at the heart of government, you do need ministerial leadership for it. And as a junior minister in the Department of Bays, I'm doing my best. But, you know, Patrick Vallance brings a huge amount of strength, and you're hearing from Patrick shortly. He and I worked together before I came to Parliament. But if we're really going to make this a moment where we do it, I do think we need to look at the machinery of government and think quite seriously about how we make sure this incredibly important sector is properly represented. There's something strange that my whole portfolio is 10 times bigger than the whole of DCMS. DCMS are a great digital department, but this isn't just about that. We need a voice for broad science, for scientia, and for the relationship, but the difference between science, technology, and innovation. And I think if you look back at governments from Churchill, who created this post, Lord Cherwell was the first holder, through the post-war years, distinguished holders in the past, William Aldergrave, David Sainsbury. I think history suggests that if you really want this to work, you've got to give it some clout at the heart of government. And I think this government would say, well, we are. The doors are open. Freeman's doing it. We've put the money in. But in the contested reality of politics and priorities, I think it is important that we have a voice at the top table.
Thank you very much, Minister, for that insight. And you may be biased, but I think we can all say that we'd very much like a cabinet post to be there representing science. So thank you very much for your words today.